Sometimes the best medicine is simply a closer relationship with nature. Rupert Koopman is a Cape Town botanist dedicated to bringing fynbos, the region's unique flora, back into people's daily lives. He has led conservation efforts with the Botanical Society of South Africa and Cape Nature, and today shares his passion through citizen science and as a tour guide weaving history, science, and culture into his storytelling. Mr. Koopman, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to extend my thanks to Thomas Pfeiffer and the team for the invitation and the support. Thank you very much. It's been a very good meeting. Okay, question number 1. Who has been to a botanical garden in the last year? Put your hand up. Good. Okay, remember that for later. I'd like to talk about my country, South Africa, and I begin every presentation I do with a couple of maps to create context. We've one of the 17 mega-diverse countries on the planet, and you can see also from this map that there's significant overlap with some of our other colleagues that we've been hearing from for the whole conference here in terms of India, China, etc. So there is this linkage between traditional medicine and places of higher biodiversity. So in this highlighted map of the globe, 10% of the globe's surface area has 70% of the Earth's species. Then another slice that we use to interpret and add value to how we understand where things are is this map of the global biodiversity hotspots. So quickly, for those of you who are unaware of the criteria, a global biodiversity hotspot is somewhere where there's a high degree of endemism, where you have at least 5,000 species of plants which are endemic to that area, and also a high amount of threat. So that means that there's been transformation of natural habitat. So South Africa is one of, I think it's the only country which has got 3 different global biodiversity hotspots. So we just are this place of a lot of interesting things happening in a quite small piece of land. And this, just to continue layering on that, is from our last national biodiversity assessment, which just shows where all these hotspots are. And I'm going to be talking about the Cape Floristic region, which is the, sorry, where does the clicker work? Anyway, the green bit in the middle, which is the only biodiversity hotspot which is found in one country entirely. So of all the other 35 hotspots on the planet, they're in various countries, but the one where I live and work is the only one which is found within one country. So it's super specialized, and we'll see what that means. Then we're very proud of our constitution in South Africa. And specifically for me, I zoom into section 24 in the Bill of Rights, which talks about our environmental rights as South African citizens. So we have this right to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations, prevent pollution, promote conservation, all those other good things that we were talking about. So I think just in terms of some of the talks that I've heard, if you think about this morning's talk about the childhood development and so forth, just to bring some more granularity to, it's good for us to be in nature, but what does that nature mean, and how can we help and protect that nature? So in South Africa, but I think this is also pretty global, our major threat is habitat loss. That means clearing of land for development, habitat degradation, where land is not managed in the best possible way for it to continue, and then also invasive alien species. So that's species that have been moved from elsewhere that outcompete your local species. And then interestingly, and way down the list, in number 4, is harvesting. So that indicates plants that are wild harvested, whether it is for medicine, for food, or for cultural or spiritual reasons. But also, like Czechoslovakia, we heard last night on the boat, we're a country with an interesting political background and history. And what that means is also that the access to natural resources is driven by our history. So this map indicates the map of South Africa, which was from the Native Land Act, which was enforced in 1913, and that then subdivided the country into where racial groups could be. So if you're my kind of flavor, we're from an ethnic group called Colored. We've got Black African people. You might know Nelson Mandela. Then Indian or Asian people, and white people. Those are the kind of 4 big groups, ethnic groups. But what this map shows you is the blobs are where black people were allowed to have land, and the rest of the country was exclusively for white people in terms of tenure. But what you'll notice is that down where I'm from, Cape Town, which is bottom right, it's good, down there, there's no land allocated for people who don't look like Caucasians. And so even though we've had political change, and since 1994, democracy and so forth, that pattern of land ownership and access is still one which needs a lot of work to correct so that there is equity of access. And I like smashing different maps together because they tell a story. And so if you think about the previous map and this one, this is now how the biodiversity in South Africa is fit together. Again, we've got many, many different biomes, 11, 10. And down there in the red, that's where I operate, in the fynbos, and mostly in the purple area. But you can see the country has got a whole lot of different things going on. And what that means from a medicinal plant and useful plant point of view is each biome has got its own unique climate, its unique assemblage of plants, which means that the traditional use of plants in that biome would be different to all the other ones, because you're working with a different palette. And then, if we flip between those 2 slides, you can see there's like a little bit of correlation in terms of how the major ethnic groups are scattered around the country. And so for purposes of this presentation, I'm just sticking to the top 4 that I mentioned. So generally speaking, the colored people who look like me are well represented in the Western Cape. And you can see the white South Africans are in the urban centers. So if you've been to South Africa, Johannesburg is over there, Cape Town. We've got Asian dotted mostly on the East Coast as well, and then Black South Africans. What you also need to know is just from an aridity point of view, this over here is basically like a semi-desert. So the concentration of people tends to be along the coast. Okay, let's talk about medicine. So sorry, this isn't a very legible slide, but I'll read through it. So from an ethno-medicine point of view, most South Africans, so about 70% of our population, rely on traditional healthcare, African traditional medicine, for some or all of their healthcare needs. And that basically counts for 1/3 of all healthcare that is delivered in South Africa. So what you need to know about this is that this is mostly informal. So your African traditional medicine practitioners are not recognized like Western healthcare practitioners. Excuse me. So you can't go and use your medical aid to get African traditional medicine. You can use it when you go to the hospital or to the doctor for healthcare. And at the time of the slide, which is from a couple of years ago, there's more than 200,000 traditional health practitioners in the country. And then to feed that, the practitioners, they are just under 100,000 harvesters and traders. And most of that harvesting is still happening from the wild. So it's important for livelihoods and for our rural economy. And the African traditional medicine sector is worth 18 billion rand annually, which is probably about 20 million Czech crowns. 20 billion, excuse me. Because it's just it's 1 to 0.8 approximately, the conversion. But then there's this interesting thing about the African traditional medicine is that, remember, we come out of apartheid, post-1994, but it still is this massively informal trade, and there's not a good understanding of how it works. What we do know is that the plants in the wild that are being harvested are reducing all the time, just because we have developed most of the most productive areas, and so we need to start thinking about how we can do it from alternative sources. So I was fortunate to be part of a workshop in Mpumalanga, so that's up close to the Kruger National Park. And it was a series of workshops also. But what I learned in that process is that culture is dynamic. When I started in conservation in 2003, the understanding was that traditional medicine practitioners only want to harvest from the wild. They're not interested in cultivated material. By the time of these workshops in 2021, that had changed quite a bit. So under the correct circumstances, if there are no alternative resources and all the resources are scarce, the healers will use cultivated plants and also grow their own plants as well. But like we've spoken today and for the last couple of days in this meeting, traditions are stubborn. And by tradition, I mean conservation in this phase. So I still speak to conservation practitioners that are like, oh, the healers only want to use the wild harvested stuff. But they're not tuned into processes like this that we've been part of. So essentially what's happened here is there was a biodiversity management plan drawn up for the 6 most threatened medicinal plant species in Mpumalanga. And after those 6 were identified, there was a set of consultative meetings. So here you can see this is a meeting in the Lowveld Botanical Garden with traditional healers from the Eshlangeni district and discussing how they feel about the plants and about access and so forth. And based on this report and set of meetings, essentially, then people put together a plan where the botanical garden would grow some of the plants, and an array of conservation partners in the landscape would distribute them to the healers where they are. So we've actually shifted the culture a bit there. I've only been a small part of it, but it really is a very useful understanding of how things can shift. And key to it is this lady over here in the headdress in front, Nolwazi Mbongwa, and she's both a botanist and a traditional healer. So that's the important thing also of ensuring that we have more representativity when we go and work in places. You know, like the old ethnobotanical studies from the 1800s that I read is, it's a German or English person going to South Africa on a collecting trip, and they're talking to indigenous people through a translator and trying to find out what the uses are for plants and so forth. Obviously, the information is lost, and context is lost, because context is super important. And so finally now, we're getting to the point where we do have representation in science in South Africa, where we have got ethnobotanists and scientists who are of those local traditions and can go and talk to people in their own language and understand the culture and then record that information. And that gives us a better outcome. And so one of the interesting things that's been happening is my co-author here is Dr. Jimmy Simmons from a company called Happy by Nature, based in Cape Town. Jimmy's a vet by training and works with, he trained in the UK and has been back in South Africa for almost a decade now. And when he works with plants for his veterinary medicine, and when he started working locally in South Africa, he couldn't find plants. So if you don't find the plants freely available, then you start the nursery, and that's what he's done. And there was a little nursery in Cape Town, and now a bigger nursery at the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden. And what's interesting about Jimmy and the team is that they started these indigenous herbal medicine courses. Oops, sorry. And so the herbal medicine courses are essentially to do the following things. So they're professionally accredited, and the idea is to bring people of all medicinal backgrounds, from Western doctors to traditional healers and allied health practitioners and nurses, midwives, pharmacists, into the same room to have discussions about some of our medicinal plants. So our most obvious ones, and so the idea is then that there's a set of lectures and interactions which integrates traditional medicine with modern science, learning from traditional and biomedical healthcare professionals, and theoretical and hands-on practical sessions, as well as networking and collaboration. Because, like in this room, we come from very different backgrounds. And so every opportunity that we can collect around common cause is a good one. So that's kind of what it looks like. So I've been part of the course too, so lecturing, talking about the conservation background of the plants and where they're from. On the left, you've got someone from the Rasta or Khoi tradition, which is very Cape Town-based. Then you also have Inyangas as well. And so we all come together. We've got the medicinal plants on the table. We can taste them, smell them, and talk about and exchange information in that space. Okay, so that's intervention one. And it's, when I've been hearing about Ayush and everything else, it would be great if we could talk a bit more about how we could get some more support in terms of talking to the various government agencies and so forth, because at this moment in time, this is very much like low-level work. Jimmy is working with the University of Cape Town, but there is a University of Stellenbosch representative in the room, and we'd like to broaden that out because there's a model which could start shifting things. Okay, so I'm shifting now to much closer to home. This is a project that I've been involved in Cape Town's northern suburbs, and I'd just like to credit my co-author there, Louise Ferreira, and this is where we're trying to bring indigenous plants back into an urban setting. So, and using quite strong principles, which we'll get into. But this gives you an idea of what the neighborhood looks like. So there we work with the Welgemoot City Improvement District, which is a non-profit company, which then is allowed to get some portion of rates to do projects in the neighborhood. And so within that blue area, there are some open spaces. So where the yellow flowers are, those are open spaces which generally tend to be semi-natural, so not completely natural. To your left over there, there is a nature reserve. But what we're trying to do is bring elements of the nature reserve into the suburbs using the following principles. So the vegetation type there, I spoke about fynbos earlier, is Renosterveld, and that is a critically endangered vegetation type. It's the vegetation type in South Africa with the most threatened species because it's got fertile soil, and that's where a lot of the initial agriculture happened with the Dutch occupation of South Africa. And the plants that we were trying to use are not commercially available. So what would happen is I would go out with a team of trained horticulturists and processors, and we've got a long list of plants that we're trying to grow, and then I point them out, and we either take cuttings or seeds or dig a couple out, with permits, of course, and grow them. And so we try to be quite hardcore in terms of where they come from. So within a 15-kilometer radius from exactly the same vegetation type, so it's the same genetics that we're working with. And so some of those plants are of food and of medicinal value, and ultimately we want to get to a point where we're producing sufficient cuttings and so forth that we can start giving it to people who live in that neighborhood so that they can plant it at home, and we can give them some idea of, you can use this for culinary purposes, or you can use them for medicinal purposes. What's key there is volunteers. So it's quite a well-off neighborhood, so people do have spare time and energy. In South Africa, of course, we're working on a socio-economic gradient, so this model is not easily transferable to a lower income neighborhood, but at least we're starting to get things going, and maybe this is where cross-subsidization can start happening in the future. And essentially, we just want people to see indigenous plants, because people don't know what our indigenous plants look like. And so this is one of the parks that we operate in, and it gives an example of the range of things that we do. So on the left-hand side, you can see there was basically a lawn, and then a year later we were planting in that area, and then 2 years later, that's what it's starting to look like. And what's key is, and some of my Indian cricket-loving people here were asking me about the droughts in Cape Town, and that's another aspect that's important when you're working with locally indigenous plants, is if you collect them and plant them in the right time in the rainy season, then you don't need to irrigate. So our plants here are performing better than conventional landscaping that's been done because of careful plant selection. Then a slightly different parameter is where we try and build a park using, again, the same plants. But this is very much more of a landscaping and design intervention because people aren't used to seeing these plants that we're collecting from the wild within a landscaped way. So the first corner that I showed you was a lot more organic. That was planted, and we were seeing what was happening, and here there was a lot more of a design intent to it, because it's an iconic plant, or not plant, iconic park, which has got a structure, a climbing structure of an airplane. And so last year, a year ago exactly, planting was happening, so you can see where the straw is down, and this is a year later. So with very little, so there is some additional irrigation, but there's been quite a little, maybe 10 times in a year that irrigation was required. It's well loved. I've been going to that park with my daughter for 9 years, and it's never been as busy as it's been now. So on weekends, people are having birthday parties there with the kids. There's always a bunch of people there, so it's a really nice place to go. It's a showcase for plants that people aren't aware of anymore. And we're starting to see like interesting insects coming back into the neighborhood. Okay, so in conclusion, we know about the health benefits of nature, the mental, cultural, and spiritual benefits that many of my co-speakers have highlighted for the last couple of days. So the question is, do we know, as practitioners, what do your medicinal plants look like? Not when they're in a bottle or dried up. What do they look like as a plant entity? Do they come from habitat which is endangered? I think that's an important question to ask, is like, are they safe? Is there potential for more? Because if we lose habitat, we lose options. And if we want to expand this work that we're talking about, it's super important to hold on to those options and have as many options as possible for all the work we need to do in future. Then, can you direct resources or political assistance to protecting nature or primary research? That's super important. I work in conservation. Conservation, everyone sees as something which is not important. And at least health is seen as something which is more important and has got more direct access to the levers of power. How can we work together to ensure that we can keep our options open? And I'm going to challenge you based on my first question, to go visit botanical gardens and partner with them so that we can support the work of botanical gardens, which essentially will be supporting our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Koopman, thank you so much for your presentation full of inspiration. It was wonderful.